The moderator for this session. A couple of important reminders. We have a reflection wall for which we'd love to get your thoughts. During the session, we'll post a link on chat with a question related to our topic. Please follow the link and post your answers there. Also, during the session, if you have questions for our panelists, please be sure to post them in the Q&A box and we'll get them answered. And on that note, let's go ahead and meet our moderator, Tanmoy Goswami. With years of journalistic and entrepreneurial experience behind him, and after his recent stint as the world's first sanity correspondent at The Correspondent, a transnational media platform headquartered in Amsterdam, Tanmoy founded Sanity by Tanmoy, an independent platform on the politics, economics, and culture of mental health. He pivoted to writing about the global mental health movement after spending a decade in business journalism at establishments like ET Prime, Fortune India, and Spenta Multimedia. Tanmoy, it's a pleasure to have you here, and over to you.
Thanks a lot, Vipul. Thank you to Harappa for making space for this conversation. I hope I'm audible. If not, somebody can just give me a
Yes, you're loud and clear. We can hear you fine.
Okay. Fantastic, fantastic. I'm super excited to be joined by two extremely special people, two people whose careers and work I've had the opportunity of following sort of closely, Neha Kirpal and Subhrata Prakash. Neha, I'd like to introduce you first. She has worked at the intersection of the creative and social sectors for over a decade. She was the founder of India's first international art fair. And she ran it successfully for 10 years, and then she moved to the mental health sector. In 2019, Neha joined Dr. Amit Malik as co-founder of Inner Hour, which is a technology-led mental health platform that delivers omni-channel products and services for a range of mental health conditions. Neha, welcome to this conversation. Moving on to Subhrata now. Hi, Subhrata, welcome. Subhrata has worn many illustrious hats throughout her career, from IRS officer to income tax commissioner to policy expert, author, and poet. She is currently director at Niti Aayog. And the reason I know her and I absolutely adore and admire her work is because she's a fervent mental health advocate. She's the author of a book called The D Word, which I highly recommend to everybody. And Subhrata and Neha today will be talking to me about the real crisis, as we call it, mental health, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic. We'll try and talk about why this conversation is relevant for an event like Bridge for the audience that has gathered here. And I'd like to just begin by sharing this sort of image with you. If you could, for the next 40 minutes, just imagine mental health, not in clinical or medical terms, but as a ping pong game. As a table tennis match between our biology and our environment. Just stay with that image, because that really is the sort of definition of mental health that we would try to tackle over the next 40 minutes, not as a clinical or medical condition alone, but as something that is profoundly influenced by our lived environment, and our mental health in turn has a huge bearing on the environment around us. So Neha, I'm fascinated by your career transition. And as we say in the mental health movement, nobody wakes up one morning and decides to work in mental health unless there's a personal story. And I'd like to invite both of you one by one to spend like a couple of minutes just talking to us about what brought you here, why work in mental health. So over to you, Neha, first.
Thank you, Tanmoy, and the entire team at Harappa for bringing this conversation into the here and now. Incredibly relevant, and very happy to be here. Tanmoy, you're absolutely right. I think mental health and struggles associated with that is something we all experience at some level in the course of our lifetime. And some of us have sort of experienced it to a degree that sort of drives us to perhaps try and come back and make some difference. So for me, I've spent 35 years in my sort of life of 4 decades, really thinking about this mental health problem as I grew up in the shadows of it, so to say. in the 80s, when you didn't understand what some of the big words like schizophrenia and others were, seeing a lot of that in the family and really sort of seeing the effect that it has on generations after is really something that drove me. So being entrepreneurial and sort of a bit of a dreamer, I kind of felt like, those who have really sort of struggled and seen the brokenness of the system and been broken as a consequence in some way, can really contribute to this ecosystem. And so to bring the voice, like Subrata and yourself, to bring the voice of those who have lived through some of this, and really partner with other stakeholders who are in positions of influence and support, so that together we can try and build solutions that work, that are real, and that are actually solving for the people directly affected. And that's across schools, across organizations. So very happy to share more as we go.
Thank you, Neha. I must say, there was a time until relatively recently whenever somebody would share their life story with me, I would be tempted to say, oh, this is so brave of you. But I've stopped doing that because I feel like there is a lot more at work beyond bravery or courage or these other adjectives that people use when somebody with lived experience talks about their story openly. I think normalization is something we talk about all the time, and sharing these stories is of course a way to normalize, but it also is deeply healing for the people who are sharing these stories. So I have learned that from my own experience, and thank you, Neha, for sharing a glimpse of your story. Subrata, how do you manage all of this? You are an author, a poet, an activist, an advocate, and one of the most outspoken voices on Twitter. Tell us a little bit about what got you here.
Hi, Tanmoy, and hi, Neha. It's really good to be here with you today. And before I start speaking about myself, I would just like to thank the organizers, Harappa, very much for having me on the show and giving me another platform for being outspoken, as Tanmoy said. So I would just like to echo what Neha said, that most of us who are here in mental health, there is a personal story behind it. And in my case, of course, it's my own story. Before I was actually diagnosed with depression, I had absolutely no clue what depression meant or what was anxiety disorder, although I was showing signs of it. And I used to have these panic attacks, anxiety attacks. I had been experiencing depression for about 5 years before I was formally diagnosed with major depressive disorder. So I belonged to that section of society which has no clue about mental health. And I used to think that depression is something which happens to people who are, weak and they get very sad. They're not able to deal with their life. And I knew myself to be one of the strongest people. And it was a wake-up call. I was kind of very relieved that there was some explanation, some label for what had happened to me, something that I could deal with. It was a problem to be solved, but it wasn't an easy problem. And I spent some hellish years in one of the most severe phases, if severity had a scale. For me, it was really a very dark period of my life. 4 years of it I spent in very dark depression, and nothing was working for me. I was taking therapy. I was on all varieties of bouquet of medication. It's escalating from a simple antidepressant to a mood stabilizer to everything, and somehow nothing was working for me. And it was at the depths of this depression that I decided to start openly talking about it, because I was suffering a lot. There was a lot of stigma, and the way society functions, they always blame someone for falling ill. So the blame of not being able to overcome my depression or get better or recover, whatever term we use for it, was being squarely laid on me, on my heads. And everyone used to ask me that, "Aapke paas to sab kuch hai, you have everything. What is there to be depressed about?" And I had been doing a lot of research to help myself because I wanted to get better. It's true, I had a lot to live for and I really wanted to get better. So all that research led me to kind of externalize the stigma, take it out, excise it from me, because I had internalized all of it. And that's when I was able to understand that I have an illness, there's something wrong with my brain, and it's not that I'm this person who's ungrateful for everything in my life. So I wanted to share this with the world. I wanted other people to be aware of this, and I wanted no one else to suffer just the way I had done because of all the stigma and misinformation. And that's when I decided to write the book. I wrote the book. I also used to write a blog. And thereafter, yes, I mean, Twitter is one of the few places where I do my advocacy. It's not enough, but yes, once in a while, I do get a platform like today to really speak about it and try to normalize conversations around mental health so that stigma is dealt a death blow, because that is what I would really like that to happen.
Thank you very much, Subrata. I should add a couple of disclaimers at this point, I suppose. We are going to talk about potentially sensitive subjects over the next half an hour or so. So if anything that we talk about triggers you, please take a break. We are not offering any sort of mental health or medical clinical advice during this discussion. So please seek professional opinion if you are struggling with a persistent mental health challenge. And finally, I also have to admit that all of us, the three of us, are tremendously privileged. We are privileged that we're able to share our stories without, the fear of stigma or, backlash. We've had to work to get there, but we can't deny that we are all extremely privileged that we get a platform like this, and that we're able to articulate what we feel, what we think without having to censor ourselves. And I think that's a function of privilege. So with those sort of disclaimers, let me go back to Neha. Neha, I'm aware of the work that INNER does with employers in particular. And I'm very interested, I think the pandemic has given a different spin to the idea of mental health at the workplace. For decades, we have known this idea by various terms, employee happiness, employee wellness, employee well-being. But the idea of mental health is fairly under the spotlight now. And companies are doing what they can to help their employees. I want to understand from you, from your experience of working with employers, what are they finding really effective, and what are some of the points of friction that they're reporting back to you as a service provider and also as a thought leader in this case? What are you picking up from employers?
Sure. I mean, it's, employers and workspaces are such a large influence and part of our life that, their role can very positively impact how we're feeling and how we're coping through the pandemic, and also can be very detrimental to what somebody may be going through. So I think it's a position of great responsibility, and it must be considered. Because and what people don't often understand is there are immediate, midterm, and long-term repercussions of not investing in mental health, and that's something that we are seeing at an individual level as well as at a cohort and collective level. The one thing I would say, Tanmoy, to your initial comment about the aftermath of the pandemic. Just a word of caution there that a lot of companies are now looking at this phase as the aftermath, and therefore a lot of the knee-jerk initiatives that people took to try and perhaps do more in the name of employee wellness it has sort of started to take a backseat in some context. So, what we're doing constantly and we're encouraging is for organizations to see this as an ongoing sort of midterm, long-term support system that needs to be there. And we work extensively with companies across sizes and sectors, large multinational corporations, Indian enterprises, startups, not-for-profits. At the start of the pandemic, we ran an IH21 pro bono program. So we opened up our digital platform for free for all organizations. Today, we're running a Mindcare program to support healthcare workers, for instance, with free therapy as well. And we find a huge uptake. And this is with organizations who may not otherwise have the budgets or may have looked at mental health. So the idea is, it's important to be able to socialize the concept right from the top down. So leaders who are sharing vulnerability are looking at the workplace through an empathy lens and are really able to put in place the supportive policies, the inclusive policies that people need. because people are at different stages. I mean, we all recognize the burnout, the grief, the health tragedies, and existing mental health conditions that have got sort of exaggerated in this period. And people have not had access to go and see their regular doctors, perhaps. And so you can just imagine the kind of isolation, parenting, addictions. There are a number of issues. And as you said, all of these are biopsychosocial, and therefore our environment, both at home and at work, and everything that's going on, the news and the anxiety that it provokes, all of that is compounding the stress in us. And so the question is, what can we do at various levels? At a preventive level, what are we doing programmatically with our webinars, with our self-help programs? We're seeing a huge uptake in terms of people using sort of mood trackers and chatbots. The employees are engaging that much more than they were before the pandemic. So we're seeing a much greater engagement, particularly with stress programs, with addiction, various other sort of very specific concerns. And then at the curative end as well, many more people seeking out for more serious needs. It could be in terms of therapy, it could be in terms of psychiatry, but organizations actually saying that we want a full stack solution. We don't want to just provide the sort of preventive support, but if people need more, and not just the employees, but also the trend is that to support their family members. So a lot of our programs now are being signed on for the employee and 3 dependents, for instance, with unlimited sessions and perhaps in some cases psychiatry rolled in as well. So that provides a more holistic solution. And then you sort of create the awareness and you inform people about it, and you socialize among the leadership and management teams to create an internal culture that can support that mental health work. So that's a bit about what we're doing with organizations and also with universities.
Right. Thank you, Neha. Yeah, I think this workplace mental health can be treacherous terrain for employers because, as you said, a lot depends on organizational culture. I think all of it depends on organizational culture. And if you bolt on external solutions, whether it's an app or yoga on Zoom or what have you, it's not really going to be a lasting solution unless you fix the real reasons why people feel distressed in the workplace. And of course, then there are things beyond the workplace that people carry into the workplace that companies have relatively less control over. And that's then maybe some of the curative approaches or offering a therapist. Though I must say, I'm picking up a lot of apprehensions from employees, people. There is, I think, a trust deficit that definitely needs to be addressed, because a lot of the times what one hears is that, we don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to the office counselor because we don't know whether our confidentiality will be respected. So why don't you give us allowance for our therapy and let us choose our own practitioner? We don't necessarily want to talk to somebody in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Tanmay, just to add on that note, actually 4 years ago when Dr. Amit Malik started the platform, we had over 7 lakh people take our free assessments, and we realized that people want to help themselves. And so the whole idea of creating the personalized programs, which is taking the CBT and the other therapy-based modules and digitizing them, is that people can work on it on their own time, 24/7, and not necessarily as a first step with a therapist. And it typically, people who do that tend to feel more encouraged, and they get some taste of recovery, and they want to then seek more help. And they've been able to break that initial barrier. So in that sense, the technology interface is very, and all the support tools are very helpful.
That's very interesting. Yes, of course. And then of course there is you said in the beginning about the long-term sort of organizational or business effects of not investing in mental health care. One also has to be mindful that a lot of the conversation around mental health at the workplace tends to converge on the idea of productivity, which in itself is a big cause for employee distress. But that's a subject for another day. I want to come back to Subrata. Subrata, a senior government leader, talking about some of the most delicate issues of sort of the human condition. Why is it important for us to if we have the power and the privilege to be transparent about our struggles? What have you seen? Have your colleagues become more emboldened because you speak out? Have they been able to shed the fear of public censor or sort of stigma? What has been your experience?
Yes, Tanmoy. I mean, that's something very positive that has happened. Because I'm one of those people who's spoken openly about having survived depression. And I also say that I live with anxiety disorder because it is what it is. I have to fight that anxiety every day. So there are very few people who have actually opened up, in whether it's government or whether it's in the private sector, I'm sure, because there's still so much of stigma. So my being there has also enabled a lot of people to, come up and talk about it. And I know that for sure, because there's this colleague of mine who had reached out to me, who also had a little bit of postpartum depression. And there were issues that she had and she wanted to talk about it, and then she was not sure how to go about it. So I did encourage her that let's just see if your supervisory officer is kind of open to it. What is your relationship? How do you feel that he or she might react? And my colleague said that, oh, well, it's worth a try. So I said, yes, then just go ahead, try speaking about it, because who knows, we don't give people enough credit. Maybe this person that you're talking to would actually be empathetic, sympathetic, and may try to support you. And this is exactly what happened. She did go and speak up, and she did receive a lot of support and empathy from her supervisory officer. So that is one success story. Now, that's enough to provide a little bit of encouragement. And what my experience has been that, prior to my writing the book and prior to my being a mental health advocate and talking openly about it, I've had a couple of not so pleasant experiences where, my intentions were questioned, that maybe she just wants to shirk work, she doesn't want to work, and that's why she has depression. But now it's a completely different picture. In my present office, as far as I'm concerned, my supervisory officer and everyone around me has been very supportive. I also try to provide a safe space for anyone in my workspace who wants to come and talk to me, and people do that. And it's really, really important to, keep the confidences in one place. There are so many things going on in the workplace. So there are conflicts of different kinds, and you have different roles to play at different times. So when I advocate for someone who is reporting to me, I have to be very, very careful that if they have discussed their mental health issues with me, I should not bring it into the mix unless and until they have given me explicit permission to do so. So I do a little bit of a dance there. And there are other officers also, like I know a senior colleague of mine who's also spoken about her experiences. She's also doing quite a bit in the field of, mental health advocacy. So I guess things are changing a bit, but I would say that the stigma is just like, it's too deep. And what is that, I mean, what basically I am doing, at least I am just scratching at the edges. I'm just chipping a little at the edges. There's a lot of work to be done. And the day when people who come to me and say, please don't talk about this to anyone, when those people are actually with the privilege, I'm talking about civil servants. Most of the people who come to me are themselves civil servants. So, and as you can say that, okay, relatively a privileged class. So the day when my colleagues are able to tell me that, okay, Subhrata, this is my problem, but there's no harm in talking about it, or how do I take it up further, or, something like that, that would be the day I think that maybe my work would have made a difference, or maybe society would have been changing, or I can say with some degree of satisfaction that, yes, I mean, mental health advocacy has had something concrete, some really positive outcome.
Yeah, thank you. You are making a difference. Let's not doubt the difference that you're making. I want to, I'm mindful that we have to reserve some time for questions, and there are some very interesting ones. I do want to tell the audience that there is a poll. If the team at Harappa could please make the poll available to the audience members. There it is. Do you have a senior leader accountable for the employee or student mental health at your organization? I think that's the first step, really. That is step 0, in fact. If you're serious about mental health, you have somebody who's taking accountability and responsibility for it. So we're very interested in seeing what that poll reveals. Coming back to this sort of another area around workplace mental health. So last year I saw Udemy, which is this professional skills development platform. They've done a survey, and the 2 skills that that seemed to be the most in demand or had grown the most in demand over the previous year. One was anxiety management at the workplace, and the other was resilience. And it got me to think, can you really train something like resilience? Is that a skill? And so the poll results are in, I think, are these partial results. So at the moment, 5 out of 20 are saying yes, they have somebody responsible for mental health at their organization. The vast majority don't, and that's all right. So long as you're aware that this is something that needs to be a part of your manifesto, it's all right. You have to start somewhere, and I think recognizing, the starting point is very important. And just a thought starter for you. So coming back to this idea of, the extent to which mental health is a learnable skill at the workplace. What are the dangers when we overdo that messaging? That you can learn resilience, you can learn empathy, or you can learn vulnerability, and to what extent is it really possible? Neha, I'd like to first hear from you.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a really important thing to look at it as a skill, and typically when you have personalized therapy sessions as well, what you're doing is helping people develop some of those skills. So being able to process, being able to problem solve, being able to cope, being able to manage anxiety, these are all things that can be imbibed and inculcated over time. Having said that, it's so personal to each one. We all, what we must remember is that mental health is one big word, but even within that, depression, anxiety, the way people experience their symptoms is very unique to them. And therefore, what will work for them is also very, very specific to them. And so what we cannot do, and sometimes this is the challenge, is that we generalize and we say, okay, these are all sort of this is a skill building workshop, or you do a resilience building summit, right? Now, some of those things don't necessarily work, and sometimes it can result in people feeling a state of handicap, feeling more debilitated, feeling unable to cope, and it can actually compound the problem. So it's important to recognize that beyond a point, maybe there are certain clinical conditions that need support that is beyond your own individual skill and control, right? Perhaps for a period of time. And it's very hard for the person suffering to know that. And for you to be able to make a layperson assessment. So to do things very mindfully, of course, the kind of preventive skills that can be built are all around building empathy, building mindfulness, doing things that is around self-care. Ultimately, Tanmay, what are we talking about? We're talking about recognizing and having a sense of self, right? Some degree of awareness about who we are and where we're really at, so that we can recognize when it is that we've been thrown off that balance, and what is the extent of that throw off, right? In terms of physical symptoms, in terms of clinical symptoms, in terms of behavior and moods and relationships, and then we can sort of decide what kind of support would work best. So with a word of caution, I think it's important to think about it, but looking at a template approach of just saying, well, we're doing something for resilience and we're done with our mental health tick mark is a real challenging premise, and it can actually create further alienation. And the challenge with mental health is that oftentimes it's masked for years, as Subrata shared. And so people are, there is absenteeism, there is a drain of morale, drain of motivation. People are clinically depressed, perhaps on the verge of their being suicidal in some cases, and yet you may not see it for a very long time. And therefore, it's very important to be overly cautious and be proactive, knowing the nature of it. To be proactive in how we think about it and how we plan for it, particularly at an organizational level.
Right. Yeah, I think if your communication is transparent, and the reason why you're doing it, the reason why you're investing in it is not overtly sort of pegged to just productivity, and you communicate to your employees and your people that you understand that mental health is a fundamental right, and it's an issue of justice and it's an issue of fairness. Then all of those knock-off effects will come. You will get a spurt in productivity. That's just how the human mind operates. You keep a human being well, and they tend to deliver and respond well. But if the only reason you're doing it, like you said, is to sort of tick a checkbox, then of course it's a problematic approach. I'm going to come to Subrata with a question that we have from one of our audience members. Aarti Seth is asking this question. Why do heads of organizations see mental health issues as a sign of weakness? Subrata?
Okay. Okay, it's a fantastic question, and I would like to begin answering that by saying that it's not just limited to heads of organizations. This is something which is prevalent throughout society, because we really have not thought about mental health. We have not given it thought, and also because of the challenges that are involved in actually, finding out and diagnosing and sequencing what causes mental disorders, because there is mental health and there is mental illness. So we have to recognize that it's a continuum, and people do move from one side to the other. But what happens is that disorders like depression, which is major depressive disorder, or anxiety disorder, see, they are mostly seen as, depression is seen as sadness and anxiety is seen as nervousness. So not many people have given it thought enough to read about it, to know that there are neurological correlates of these, because ultimately a little bit of jargon here, but we cannot walk away from the fact that we human beings, we think and we behave. And there are neurological correlates of our thoughts and behavior which lie inside our brain. So someone who has major depressive disorder is not just sad. Major depression is just a label which is put on a collection of symptoms. Basically all mental disorders are, we exhibit certain symptoms, and then for ease of treatment, with the tools that we have available today, the professionals just put a diagnosis that, okay, these symptoms means this, these symptoms could be this. So that is where we are right now. Maybe if we start talking a little more about mental health and mental disorders, and people actually are able to move beyond seeing everything as madness or laziness or shirking work, and try to understand what happens, how beyond how all of this is beyond our control. I mean, someone having an anxiety attack, it's not just their thoughts, it's then their autonomic nervous system which has just sprung into action, and there is no time for this person to react. So these are things which are unfortunately not out there. People have not thought about it. And that is why the stigma, that is why this whole the talk about, faking it, as your question also wanted to say, that they don't believe that there's something real in mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I don't think anybody could have articulated that better. Aarti, hope that was a satisfactory answer to your question. Neha, there's a question for you. It is a bit of a tricky one. What is the gold standard in India on employee-friendly mental health and other policies? And I just want to preface your answer to that by saying that things like the 4-day work week, which have generated a lot of attention globally, or these sort of bring your pets to work, and these almost certainly, if applied thoughtlessly, will definitely not qualify as the gold standard. I hope Neha will not disagree with me, but Neha.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is to really recognize human beings for all of their humaneness and their whole self. And just to take a pause there, because oftentimes we think, okay, this is my work life and this is my personal life, or this is my professional self, and then there's this whole other side of me that doesn't need to go to work. Now, particularly in the pandemic, we've seen the coming together of all of that, but it was always the truth. And so the first thing, I mean, there isn't one gold standard that applies to all, simply because different organizations, different cultures and countries have different kinds of work stressors and loads. So the triggers are different. For some people, it may be physical triggers. In some cases, it may be tight policies. In some cases, it might be harassment and discrimination. So the triggers are different in different contexts. But if we were to look at sort of some of the principles that people should keep in mind, the first would really be to look at an individual that is an employee as a whole self. And be able to think about what it is that would make them feel truly integrated and included in the organization. The second is to look at it not as sort of on a need basis, but something that is a core boardroom mandate. So from a leadership point of view, the more vulnerability and empathy that we show towards across ranks, and recognize that just like us, with our problems at home, there are others, we will automatically look at the culture of the organization, the policies, and how we are supporting people, whether they are struggling in a small way that they can overcome with a bit of support, or they have a serious clinical condition and they need sort of long-term ongoing support. So I think at a prevention level, it's important to look at putting in some practices. At an early intervention level, all these support programs like ours and several others that we talk about are also very important. And then last of all, of course, having some policies for intensive care and support for those who might really need more sort of a long-term support system from the organization. Looking at all of this holistically is really the answer. And the minute you separate it and put it into silos, saying, I'll do this bit, then it's sort of, there isn't much point to it. Because as we said, these are macro conditions and they need to be looked at in a 360-degree holistic way. So look at the biopsychosocial input factors and look at how we can help solving for the whole human being is how I would say we can start thinking about gold standards. Each to his own, of course.
Yeah, this chimes in beautifully with one of my pet theories. I always tell whenever friends and corporations ask me where they should begin, I tend to tell them to stop thinking about happiness and start thinking about humanity, because happiness is interpretable in 20,000 different ways. You can, for some people, free snacks makes them very happy. For some other people, if you give them a good bonus, that makes them happy. But I think the yardstick for humanity is the same. And if you get to that, then you don't have to worry about all these bells and whistles. You just create a safe, humane workplace, and the rest kind of tends to magically fall in place. Deepika had a question about whether mental health intervention should be covered in corporate health policies, benefits. Every company celebrates Mental Health Week and so on, but when it comes to real meaningful action, none is taken. I think they've addressed that question, Deepika, in bits and pieces. Thank you for raising that issue, though. I think we are almost out of time. There is a reflection wall. I think this was, we could go on for another 2 hours discussing mental health between the three of us. Hopefully this was useful for those of us, for those of you listening in. And here was a question for the reflection wall. What is a mental health technique that you found useful? And some really interesting responses there. Sticking to the basics: physical exercise, sleep, good company, meditation, and staying in touch with spirituality. Only do what makes you happy. I want to talk to this person separately and understand how to do that. But yeah, jokes apart, it is actually a very powerful way of taking back control if you can define the activities that are in your control and just focus on what makes you happy, of course. Knowing when to say no and imposing boundaries, that is actually super powerful, I think. Something that a lot of people struggle with, including at the workplace. Connecting with other people, being physically active, learning new skills, sticking to regular work hours to the extent possible, and also minimizing phone usage during work hours. A lot that I personally am taking away from. I feel I'm very sheepishly looking at all this great advice and wondering why, in spite of, this is all very commonsensical, but why do we struggle to implement all of this in our own lives sometimes? But thanks to everybody for being part of this. And I would, once again, Neha and Subrata, thank you for taking the time to do this. And Team Harappa, thank you once again for hosting us. And it's back to Vipul now, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanmoy, for your masterful facilitation. Thank you, Neha and Subrata, for a very important and enthralling conversation. So there's a lot that a lot of us can take away from this chat. Thanks again to our attendees as well for the excellent interaction, both on the Q&A and on the reflection wall. So we're going to go ahead and end this colloquy here. Up next, we have an exciting huddle on reimagining faculty beyond PhDs and tenures. That's coming up on track 1. And that'll be live in a couple of minutes here. We'll be sharing a link on chat that will take you straight to that conversation. Please stay tuned to Bridge. There's a lot more coming up. Thank you for staying with us. And thank you to our speakers again. We'll see you.